Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, your brother, and your friend, Rashid. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me here and for giving me another hour of your day and another day of your time. We'd like to thank each and every one of you from the depth of our soul to the bottom of our heart, because we know that time is precious and the most valuable and unrenewable resource. So we hope that when you join us, we can give you an equal or greater value for your time. So without further ado, I got to bring in the man of the hour, my colleague and friend. This guy is awesome. I'm telling you, from 7 steps to Sunday to the very day we speak right now, this guy is awesome. Alex Krainer, how's it going today, my friend?
It's going well, Rashid. Good to be with you again. Thank you for the invite. Greetings to your viewers and listeners.
Alex, before we get into the information on what just took place between Iran and Russia, I had a colleague of mine on the show a few shows back, maybe 2 shows ago, and it was journalist and author Matthew Eric, and he brought up something about you, and he said that you had a different take on what took place in Syria, because I hear a lot of views on what took place in Syria. I'm not familiar with your view on what took place in Syria. I just want to preface everything with this. As the Syrian president was deposed, a lot of gossip and a lot of reporting was saying that he was unstable, he was this, he was that. None of that came up prior to him being deposed. And I said this: loyalty means everything to me. Loyalty. And Syria was not really the target of the U.S. or Israel. They wanted Iran and they wanted Russia. And Assad stood as a buffer against that. They offered him the removal of U.S. troops if he took Iranian troops out. They offered him being invited back into the fold of so-called Western nations if he allowed a pipeline to go through Syria, and he refused because of his loyalty to Russia and Iran. Even to the very moment, there are more things coming out. I would say gossip about how Assad fled Syria and all of this. What is your take? Because a lot of this stuff I just can't buy, because it is secondhand stuff coming after the man was deposed and after certain people, to me, did not keep their end of the bargain. I know he may say, for instance, let's just say, give credit to all of the gossip that's coming out against him. It still does not delegitimize that they should have stood by him, because he was taking the brunt of the empire for them.
Okay, so here's how I interpreted the Syrian situation. It happened on Sunday, 8 December, if I remember correctly, that his government fell. The insurgency from Idlib started on 27th November. So that's about 11 days. Syria fell in 11 days' time. So that's a bit fast. How many jihadists invaded Syria? Between 20 and 30,000. And they were mostly armed with light weapons on pickup trucks, not even real, armored personnel carriers or tanks, just, Toyota pickup trucks with machine guns and stuff. They were going against Syrian Arab Army, which counts 270,000 troops, or used to count 270,000 troops. 11 days, really? And not only that, they had 8 years, because the siege of Aleppo was lifted in December 2016. So the Syrians had fully 8 years to prepare for this, to reinforce their defenses, to rearm, and regroup their troops. And they knew this was coming. They were warned multiple times by the Iranians, by the Russians. And so the fact that the whole thing fell like a house of cards in the space of 11 days, to me, says that there's something else happened. This wasn't like a military victory. The Syrian army must have been ordered to stand down, because they did. They almost put up no resistance, and not only that, all of it gave in all at once. I mean, 11 days is practically, it's a blink of an eye in those, how do you call it? In those, in context of these events. And then, as you rightly pointed out, all of a sudden we had all these narratives, and part of it was how the Syrian military was very poorly. The soldiers were paid very badly, and the commanders were corrupt, and so the morale was very low, and so on and so on. All of a sudden, we hear this. But I was in the military during the wartime. We were defending our country. We were paid shit. I mean, it's not like we were doing it because the money was good. I remember very well, because we laughed about this, that my monthly salary as a soldier in the Croatian army was good to buy 4 beers out in the city. It bought about a dozen in the military canteen, but we didn't want to stay at the military canteen. We wanted to go out where, like you wanted to go see girls and stuff. And so we wanted to go out. And I remember we used to laugh because we would get our salary, we'd go out, 4 beers later, no more money, and so nobody's there because the money is good, and nobody's going to quit because they decide they're not paid enough. You're in the military. It's a total institution. You get your orders, you obey your orders, you execute. And now, of course, it's conceivable that in some unit, the morale could be so bad that they say, hey, we're not doing this. But usually it'll have to do with commanders being big jerks, with the organization being extremely poor. So the soldiers perceive that they're just going to be wasting their lives for nothing. And then you might get like a mutiny. But if mutinies were reported here and there, I would buy the narrative. But that the whole army vanishes, vaporizes in the space of 11 days, that is impossible. They're just only people who never been in the army, have never tasted war, could even countenance such narratives. So to me, that was immediately that doesn't sound right at all. And it's not like all those soldiers, 270,000 troops, would just change into their civilian clothes and go home with the head choppers coming their way. You're just going to go home where they're going to find you and lop your head off. Of course not. So I thought if the whole thing came down in the space of 11 days, there must have been an order: stand down, disband. And the only way that could be through the whole country is if the order came from the very top. And if the orders came from the very top, that means that it was a political order ultimately. And that means that it was taken probably by people who largely controlled the Syrian government or had sufficient influence. I also didn't buy the stories about Bashar al-Assad suddenly, all of a sudden, being this really, really bad, nasty dictator, because those stories didn't go around until 8th December.
Mm-hmm.
If there was anything said about Bashar al-Assad on account of his personality, it was that he was a decent man,
Mm-hmm.
that he was a principled man. And it was this same Bashar al-Assad who stood his ground 8 years ago. When in 2011 he was facing a much, much greater odds against him, because it was not only that there were all these how do you call it, all these jihadi insurgencies attacking Syria, that had full support of the Western power, and they had full support of the pretty much the entirety of the Arab League.
Mm-hmm.
And this time it's not like that. Syria had an alliance with Iran, with Russia. They were now on very friendly terms with the Arab League, with a handful of exceptions. But the situation was, let's say, the Syrian economy imploded, but in strategic terms, Syria was in a more favorable place. It would have been able to defend itself. So, to my mind, this is almost like, to use a metaphor, you have an edifice which you have to invest a lot of resources to keep it in place,
Mm-hmm.
because it's rickety, because it's because it's unsound. And so either you're going to keep repairing it, or you're going to take it down and build something new in its place, demolish it. And I think that between the Iranians and the Russians, they made a decision: let's pull it down. Let's pull it down. Let's not fight this, because I think that the other side, they didn't expect this. They launched the incursion from Idlib, because they thought they were going to bleed Syria white, weaken it completely, and then bring a regime change, but keep the country and its political institutions intact. So they would just take it over with some kind of a Juan Guaido or Alexei Navalny, something like this, and then just switch alliances with the West. So like this, they let them take Syria. The insurgents, the jihadis, you know, their ability to fight is questionable. Their ability to govern is pretty much certified nil. And so now they have a big problem. And I think that this was effectively a trap for them, because this was coordinated between the United States, United Kingdom, possibly France, Turkey, and they were confronting Syria and, by proxy, Russia and Iran. Their intention was to get the Russians out, to throw Russia out of Syria, and to overthrow the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but to keep the political structure of society intact.
Right.
And so this all blew up in their face. And my interpretation was that this was a trap. Israel overstretched itself, because they couldn't resist the temptation to take a big chunk of Syria, because they extended their control over the Golan Heights. They came within, I think, about 20 kilometers, about 15 miles from Damascus, and they have a strategic position at the height overlooking Damascus, and so they couldn't resist taking that. But Israel is broken. There's no unbreaking Israel. I think that's game over. This is just a headless chicken still running around the yard. And the jihadi groups splintered almost instantly. And now the United States has a big problem, because two very important nominal allies in the region, i.e., being Turkey and the Kurds, are enemies between themselves. So the Turks want to eliminate the Kurds. The Americans want to support the Kurds, but Americans also have an alliance with the Turks, and the Turks are part of NATO. Uh, it does appear that the Turks control HTS, but the Americans don't want HTS to rule Syria. The Americans are asking for elections ASAP, and HTS is saying, no, 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 at least 4 years. And so now they had last Sunday, they had on the 11th in Rome, they had this summit for the future of Syria. Well, neither the Turks nor the HTS representatives were invited. So you have France, Italy, Germany, United States, and the United Kingdom discussing the future of Syria, how it's going to go. But HTS, under control of Turkey, has formed the government in Damascus. So it's a complete dumpster fire there. And I think that, ultimately, the West is going to lose this one, because the political and military force that dominates in that region is Iran. Iran is also allied with Hezbollah in Lebanon. In the beginning, there was a lot of talk, Hezbollah is finished because now they broke the land bridge between Iran and Hezbollah is not going to be able to be resupplied, so they're finished. And I thought, hello, who's resupplying Hamas? And they're still fighting there. What makes you think that Hezbollah, which is much bigger, much stronger, much better prepared, is going to just, go away because they lost the land bridge with Iran? And then I also said that this land bridge has been interrupted. You can't break this land bridge. I mean, have you ever heard of a business activity called smuggling? That actually exists. And so, if you think that you broke the land bridge, who's going to police it so that the smugglers cannot get anything through? Israelis? Who's going to police it? I mean, this is smuggling as old as the hills in that region. These smugglers can run circles around the Israelis and the Americans and NATO and everybody else. And not to mention, of these 20 to 30,000 jihadis who took over Syria, most of them by far are mercenaries. What does that tell you? A, they're not from Syria, most of them. The commanding, the officer corps. And two, their loyalty lie with the highest bidder. So, if the Iranians and Russians offer them more money, or the Chinese offer them more money, they're gonna fight for them. And so, anyway, I think that the drippings of information that have been coming out of the region kind of suggest that I was broadly on the right track, that this was not a brilliant victory that just suddenly fell into the lap of the Israelis and the Western powers, that this was a trap, and that this could probably turn out to be the graveyard of the Western Empire. I think that they're going to lose, and I think that the consequences of that defeat are going to be that the West is going to lose the hegemony in the Middle East. Now, they keep telling us about, we have to be in that region. I mean, even RFK Jr. is repeating this nonsense. We have to be in that region because it is very resource rich, it's very important for our economy. And one thing that I try to explain to people is that you don't need to control that region to have whatever that region exports. You can just buy it from them. And, I'm from Croatia. We have 0 military bases anywhere in the world. And all my life, as far as I remember, we had gas at the pumps, we had coffee, we had tea, we had chocolates. We had all of these things that are produced that we didn't produce in Croatia. Guess how we got them? We exported stuff and imported stuff. What we have, we export. What we need, we import. It's trade. It's called trade. It's normal. Nobody has to be killed, and nobody has to police any region, and nobody has to have military bases everywhere around the world. The only reason why you need those military bases is because the banking institutions need to control those resources in order to make them collateral on the basis of which they will issue loans to their clients. That's why you need to control those resources. Otherwise, you can just buy them and you would still have oil and you would still have whatever it is that those regions export. Sand, I don't even know, but you could just buy it. United States is a big, powerful economy. It's bursting at the seams with entrepreneurial spirit. Believe me, I mean, I live in Europe. I can compare. I lived in the United States. I lived in, the United States forms systems. People have a can-do attitude. You give them a little bit of credit, a little bit of funding, and they make stuff happen. The United States will have crap load of stuff to trade and offer on the global marketplace. And it will earn the foreign exchange to trade with other countries. And it will be a hell of a lot cheaper than putting a gun to their heads, having all these military bases everywhere, bilking the taxpayer to pay for all those military bases. And then you still have to pay the gas in the pump. It's not like if you have military bases in the Middle East, then you get the gas for free. You still have to pay for it. So it's a crap deal. People have to understand you don't need to dominate any region to have that region's resources. It's only the bankers who need to dominate regions, because guess what happens? If US military controls the resources of those regions, and then they decide who gets the contracts to develop those resources and to exploit them and to export them and to trade them, it gets funded by, the likes of Citigroup, JP Morgan's, Bank of America, and so on. And then, like magic, those resources become collateral on the books of those banks. And then the banks don't do any work. They don't do any development, drilling, pumping, shipping, distilling, refining, distributing, nothing. They do nothing. They just get loads and loads of money in repayment of the loans that they can issue, because American men and women man the military bases and keep the gun to the heads of those governments, so that the contracts are given to ExxonMobil and BP and Shell and whoever else, KBR and Halliburton and the likes. So anyway, I think that was the question, wasn't it?
You answered it you answered it perfectly. Why do you think that this is not so well known in the UK and in the US about why the US is always talking about, or the UK is always talking about their interests abroad, as if their interests abroad supersedes the nations that they're talking about their interests lie in? Like they discard the interests of the very nations that they say that their interests lie in. I mean, why is that overlooked by the masses of the people in the West? Because the United States can say, we have interest in Syria, or we have interest in Iraq, or we have interest in Burkina Faso. And the masses of the people will just go with that, not thinking, hey, how can our interest in that country supersedes the people from that country?
Well, this is where the brainwash comes in, because we are being deliberately deceived and misguided, and so the fact that people don't understand it is by design, and it's not because people are stupid. I really reject that. People are very sharp
That's right.
if you give them true information so they can reach valid conclusions. If you feed them lies, of course they're going to look like they're stupid, because they're dealing with wrong stuff, with you're you're brainwashing them, so they cannot, like if you give somebody an equation with all the wrong parameters, of course they're going to get the wrong result. So I think that we have to work these things out. We have to understand, and I'm pretty sure that you could probably make a fairly uh, accurate calculation about how much cheaper it would be to obtain, oil and copper and coffee and rice and cocoa and whatever else you need through fair trade versus fielding this massive military. Because I don't think Americans can really fathom how badly they're being screwed with the American military budget. Everybody takes it as a normal thing that the military budget is $1 trillion. And it's more than that, because, many of the items are booked under the Department of Energy and elsewhere, so that they kind of like push it down. But it's ballpark $1 trillion. Russia, which is probably the world's most powerful military at this time, their military budget before the Ukraine war was $80 billion. $80 billion. And then you look at how much it cost Russia to produce one round for their artillery, for their cannons and howitzers, and it costs something like between $600 and $800 a piece. How much does it cost in the United States? It costs something like $5,000 or $6,000 per round. Why is that? It's the same materials, the same explosives. They're designed a bit different. They're slightly different caliber, but it's the same thing. Here it costs $5,000. Over there it costs $600. Why is that? And then, why does a modern fighter jet in Russia cost like $20 million? In the United States, it cost $120 million for the F-35s, right? And so on and so on and so on and so on. The American people are being robbed blind. $1 trillion is something like $3,000 per man, woman, and child living in the United States every year. Well, and not every man, woman, and child is actually in the workforce. It's less than half of that's in the workforce. So let's say for every taxpayer, it's going to be something between $6,000 and $10,000 a month. That is, imagine if you just had that every year to blow it up on vacation or whatever, and that's just the start. So, I think you could probably make a fairly good calculation about how much better off you would be if you just traded with other countries on a fair, equitable, respectful, constructive basis. If you made friends with people in other countries, terrorism would go away, mass migrations would go away. The American people would be better off. People in other countries would be better off. And then guess what? If they were better off, they would be affluent consumers. They would buy a lot of American exports, which would stimulate a lot of American entrepreneurship and production and industrialization. And that's how do you call it? It's a virtuous cycle. And it's something that the Chinese have done. They have, over the last 40 years, they have lifted 850 million people out of poverty. They've created hundreds of millions of affluent consumers in China today. And if you look at China today, the transformation that took place over the last 40 years, it's something amazing. Okay, full disclosure, I've never been to China, but I have YouTube, and so sometimes I peek, and it looks nice. And there's a lot of Westerners living in China who report. So all these stories about social credit score and this evil totalitarianism, that's all at this coming from the same workshops as vaccines are safe and effective. It's all bullshit. It's all part of the deception, so that we think like, oh, we have to be constantly at war because there's all this evil out there, and if we don't kill them, then they're going to come here and get us. But in fact, the reason why we have to be always at war is so that the bankers could control the collateral. Not only that, the bankers need to keep people in all those resource exporting countries. They have to keep them poor. And the reason why they need to keep them poor, because if they're affluent, they develop their domestic economy, they're going to compete for those resources. They're going to absorb a lot of those resources at home because they're going to produce stuff with them. They won't just like sell us crude oil. They will refine it at home. They will use it. They'll have air conditioning in the house. They'll drive cars. And then that oil might be a little bit more expensive for us. So we can't have that. So we need to have them all poor. And, we'll just tell them that those people are primitive and stupid and they can't run their governments. And that's why they're poor, not because we're keeping them poor deliberately. And, they used to say that about the Chinese, except that lie didn't age so well. So now you have to ask yourself, hey, maybe everybody's capable of having nice economies and good standard of living.
So, Alex, on that, before we transition to the strategic partnership signed by Iran and Russia today, could you explain? You and I have talked about this several times. Could you explain to the people about why the U.S. and the Western world need war, why the economies feed on war, and why it's almost an impossibility for them to accept peace?
I'm not even sure that the economies feed on war. I think that part of the economy feeds on war, but I think that overall the whole thing actually suffers for war. We've now had 30 years of permanent warfare, right? Starting with 2003 invasion of Iran. No, it was even before that, Afghanistan. And since then, it's been war nonstop everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did the American people, are they better off than they were 30 years ago? They're not. Things have gotten a lot worse. So it's good for the military-industrial complex. It's good for the related industry. It's good for the politicians, but it's very, very bad for medium and small enterprise, small local and regional banks. It's very, very bad for mom and pop shops. It's very bad for ordinary entrepreneurs and people who rely on just having jobs available to them to be able to make a living. So overall, it's not good. But wars are really, really good for bankers. And the reason is because, let's say you get two nations to fight a war between themselves. I don't know, like you arrange that some guy named Saddam Hussein gets in power in Iraq, and then you arm him and you say like, hey, why didn't you go kill the Iranians for us? And so he starts a war against Iran. So now both these countries are at war. They're both bleeding each other dry, and they need financial supports. They need loans. They buy weapons from you, and you say like, okay, you need all this stuff. You need medicines, weapons, loans. You need all kinds of stuff. We'll make sure you get that. But would it be okay if, say, BP got the concessions on your oil fields, forever, forever? Would it be okay that McKinsey comes and advises your government? And definitely, you need to open your markets for our GMO crops, and so on and so on and so on. So, if a country is secure and prosperous, they will do deals with you, but deals that are advantageous to them.
Mhm.
If the countries are desperate, if their economies are decimated, then they will agree to whatever you put in front of them, because the people in power are, their power is shaky. It's always touch and go, because when people are miserable, they can also overthrow, rebel, overthrow the government. There could be a military coup. All kinds of things can happen. So they need support of greater powers. Um, this is exactly what we have in Ukraine. Without the support of the Americans and the British, Vladimir Zelensky would have been swept out of office a long time ago. He would have been swept out of the office already in early 2022. But thanks to the backing of the Western powers, he's still there, even though his term has expired. He has no legitimacy, but he has the backing of the British. He has the backing of the Americans, NATO, the French, the Germans, and so forth. And the fact that they're at war, that their economy is broken, that they have no money for their budget, means that they are completely dependent on the support of Western powers. And then the Western powers can say, like, hey, all of your energy resources, that's ours. And your agricultural land, well, BlackRock will take care of that for you, and so on and so on. So you turn the country into a colony in that way. And I think that this is ultimately even why West, we've all been wondering, the United States is the greatest fighting force in the history of the universe. Why don't they ever win a war? Do they never win a war? Because it's by design. They're not supposed to win a war. The war is supposed to be ongoing, so that the country where they're deployed is destabilized on a perpetual basis, because that's what the bankers want. And it's the bankers. It's really not I kind of thought about it, and I thought, like, okay, so it's not like I think that McKinsey and KBR and BP and Shell are the good guys, but they could do business with other countries on a different basis. We have an oil company in Croatia. They just buy oil from Algeria, from Russia, from wherever. They just buy it, right? So, and same thing, Switzerland, Hungary, Slovakia, all these countries in the world trade. They import what they need, they export what they have. That's how it goes. So, to focus the blame on these multinational corporations that are so very visible everywhere around the world, it exonerates the bankers, and it's the bankers that are ultimate beneficiary of the system of incentives that kind of percolates through the system, and that determines the behavior of the whole empire.
So now as we transition to the strategic partnership that was just recently signed by Iran and Russia, what is your take on that, and how will it affect America's push for war against Iran?
Okay, so the partnership was signed today. I didn't read what the agreement says, but apparently what has been kind of dripping into the information universe is apparently quite consistent with what's actually there. Well, it means that Russia is going to be, they're essentially, they've become allies. The agreement is comprehensive, so it's not just military and defense, but I think that part of the agreement is also a defense pact. Uh, I think that what that means for the Western powers is that if you attack Iran, Russia is going to come to their defense. I don't know whether they will come with troops, but they will definitely provide them uh, support in terms of weapons, in terms of whatever supplies they need, logistics, intelligence, satellite feeds. I don't really know exactly, but let's say that it makes it suicidal for the Western powers to go against Iran, because in going against Iran, they go against Russia.
And not just that, let us not forget that prior to that, Iran and China also inked a strategic partnership, a 25-year strategic partnership. So while everybody is thinking about, oh, Russia and Iran, they have forgotten that prior to that deal, Iran inked it with China. So that means if war breaks out, like you said, it's not necessarily going to be an influx of Chinese or Russian troops, but they can help strategically with satellite data, real time information, intelligence, and arming Iran with whatever it needs to defend itself. Don't you think that that would probably be the way that Russia and China would see this? Because if war breaks out with the United States in Iran, this would weaken the empire even more, because we have to realize that this is a house of cards economically. And the more she wages war, the weaker her standing is, and the more cuts that she takes. Don't you think so?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about it, and I think that the situation in the region has changed so radically compared to what it was. I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, when everybody thought that you can't go against the United States, you can't go against the empire. So all these countries like Saudi Arabia and Lebanon and Turkey and the Gulf states, Iraq, they were all very, very afraid of the United States. And so they kind of towed the line and did as they were told. I think that today it's very, very clear that the United States is a paper tiger. The United States, even according to Pentagon's own studies, their own military brass, they had two levers of power in that region. One is alliances, and the other one is power projection. The alliances were much more solid back then. The Saudis, the Turks, Egypt, Jordan, pretty much the whole region, other than maybe Yemen and Syria. Today, all those alliances are very, very wobbly, and Jordan, like, it wasn't even there. Saudi Arabia, we'll see. With under Biden, that was game over. Maybe Trump will attempt to rescue it, but I don't know. The Saudis say, okay, we'll normalize with Israel, but only when Israel recognizes the Palestinian state. Well, that's a showstopper. Are Saudis going to say now, well, okay, well, they don't have to recognize the Palestinian state? I don't know. It doesn't really seem realistic to me. And then the power projection, that's sending aircraft carrier strike groups. So if any country in the region got overly uppity, they would just send the carrier strike group, and everybody would poop themselves, and then they would toe the line. Well, now we've seen that the Ansarallah in Yemen, they have these missiles and drones that they can target ships accurately. They can overwhelm their defenses with drones. They have hypersonic weapons that they cannot even intercept. And so the United States has had to withdraw their naval assets away from the reach of the Houthis missiles. So they, even if they wanted to, they cannot come to the aid of Israel. And Israel is completely dependent on the United States for their very existence. It's not just the military. It's not just the weapons that they keep getting shipped in every day. It's also the money. It's also the money for their budget, which used to be what, like about $3 billion a year. I think it's more than that now. I think it's like $9 billion a year. And with the war, with all the support, it's more than that still. And so if the United States can save Israel, then what's left? It's game over. And so even if it turns out, which I doubt actually, even if it turns out that Donald Trump is this dyed-in-the-wool Zionist and the Israel firster and all of these things, and I think that's probably a pose anyway. But even if that were true, there's really not very much that he can do. And can he charm the Saudis into normalizing with the Israelis? We'll find out, but I kind of doubt it. And then attacking Iran, this fantasy of them eliminating Iran, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, they might try something, but they already did try. The Israelis did try, and it didn't go so well. And they are very, very lucky that Iran has been very, very restrained in responding, because they still owe them a response to the last attack. So if the Iranians launched another massive missile attack against Israel, well, they would be in the right to do so. An attack on Iran, I think, is not going to happen. I very much doubt that Donald Trump has a whole lot of maneuvering space in that region. And I think that ultimately the Russia-China-Iran alliance is going to prevail. And their objective is going to be a complete overhaul of the security architecture in the region. And not just in the Middle Eastern region, but like across the Eurasian continent. And that means that all these crisis flashpoints that have been deliberately created there by design, going from the Baltic countries down to the Eastern Mediterranean, and then across the whole southern belt of the Eurasian continent to all the way to the Koreas. The British, to maintain their empire and their dominance over the Eurasian landmass, they deliberately created all these, so that they can pit powers to war against one another, so that they could dominate them, so that they could keep, they can maintain access to their resources. So that's, North Korea, South Korea, India, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia. It's like that whole thing. Except other than for contrived reasons of the British Empire, the British diplomacy, and their secret services, there really is no reason for most of those powers to be hostile to one another. And we saw that, recently Saudi Arabia and Iran actually buried the hatchet and made peace, reinstated diplomatic relations, and they're not enemies anymore. And that was initially through Russian mediation, and then it was finished by the Chinese. They simply brokered that deal. And so I think that it'll take pacifying Syria. It'll take pacifying the problem between the Kurds and the Turks. It will take I think Israel will have to complete it. It will not survive in its current form. It's going to turn into something completely different. And I think the two-state solution is over and done with. It's dead. I think we're gonna the only alternative left is a one-state solution. But it remains to be seen what kind of a state that's going to be. And I think it's not going to be a Jewish apartheid state. It's going to have to be some kind of a state where Jews and Christians and Muslims live as equals. And so I think that this process is going to take a long time, but it is happening as we speak now. And what we talked about with regards to Syria is part of that process of squeezing these Western powers outside of the region. And that means, the United States, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, NATO, and ending their, dominance through divide and rule.
In closing, I want you to address what's going on in the Ukrainian-Russian battlefield, because BlackRock is losing out, and all of these corporations that have put their bet, they hedged their bet on the black earth, the black soil in Ukraine, the coal mines, the lithium mines, the industries. All of this is being strategically seized by Russia as it breaks the line of control and moves forward and sees more territory. If this continues, wouldn't it make a viable Ukrainian state that is not a parasitic state impossible?
Rashid, forgive me. Could you rephrase that? I didn't understand the question.
Okay. With Russia seizing all of the lithium mines, the industries, the fertile ground for soil, the coal mines, when and it continues to move forward in its war to, as it says, to liberate more areas. Wouldn't this destroy any viability of a state for Ukraine? And wouldn't it also put an economic burden on the West that they can't bear?
Okay, I see. Yes. Well, in fact, look, the eastern oblast of Ukraine, the Donbas and the Crimea, even before the war, they accounted for about 80% of Ukraine's GDP. So that's gone. And now, over the last 3 years of war, Russians have taken control of largest deposits of coal in Europe, the one of the largest deposits of lithium, all of good chunk of the agricultural land. And I think that depending on how the war ends, how the war is concluded, I think that they might even take all of the Black Sea coast of Ukraine. They take Odessa, and I think they will take Odessa, maybe not militarily, but for sure administratively. Mm-hmm. And so what you're going to have left is going to be a very backwards, landlocked rump state of Ukraine. And yes, you're right. It's not going to be economically viable. That is, it's going to be poor, because it's not going to be either a trading power or an industrial power or even a military power. It's going to be just an exhausted, broken, backward country, a failed state. And what you're going to get from that country is mass migrations. People are not going to be able to stay there and live there. I think that the likes of BlackRock and IMF and World Bank are really, really quickly going to lose interest, and they're going to just drop them like a hot potato. And then you're going to have, Poland and Hungary and Romania probably try to take a chunk of that rump state for themselves, because each has, certain historical claims or minorities where, parts of Ukraine have majority Hungarian population, and so it's going to be a mess, but it's going to be a mess for Europe primarily. And how they're going to fix that mess, I'm not sure. But the problem is that part of this population, or maybe a large part of this population, are Ukrainian nationalists. The heirs of the World War II Nazis. And I think that there's a lot of people who are going to be in power in the States who are going to be still loyal to the Nazi ideology, loyal to the West, loyal to the United States, NATO, and hostile to Russia because they hate the Russians. And the only people they hate more than the Russians probably are the Poles. So it's really a mess. I don't know how it's going to play out. I'm a little bit worried. And I wonder if the Russians, Russia and Belarus there are going to have a serious problem with this country. Keir Starmer was in Ukraine just earlier this week, and he pledged 100-year support to Ukraine, forever and ever, until death do us part. And I'm very worried about this because all they're going to be left with is terrorism. And they've already talked about, well, if Ukraine ends up defeated, we're going to be continuing to fight Russia through terrorism. I mean, they pretty much said this in the British media, that Russia will have to face a future of their schools and cities and churches being attacked by drones and this and that. And funny enough, when Starmer was in Kiev, they were talking about continuing collaborations on things like drones and among other things. So I think that the Brits are not going to give up. This is I think that Trump administration is going to walk away from Ukraine pretty quickly, but the Brits are so obsessed with defeating Russia and partitioning it that they will never give up. And I think that they're just going to turn to terrorism, and they're going to try to continue to attack not only Russia but also Belarus, because they want to overthrow Lukashenko and install somebody to their liking. So it's going to be a mess. I don't know how it plays out, but ultimately, somehow, maybe Russians are going to have a way of policing that and containing them.
Once again, you hit it out the park, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, man. And
thank you for the invite, Rashid. Always a pleasure.
All right, my friend. I'll contact you later. Be blessed.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. Everybody, thank you all for joining me. Please remember to join me in about 15 minutes, 20 or 30 minutes. We'll be back here with a double hitter. We'll have Dimitri Lascaris on the platform. So please join us. Hit the like button. Remember to subscribe. Remember to share. I want to thank everybody on Rumble, Odyssey, and Locals, Twitter, Twitch, and anybody else that are viewing us and that is watching us around the globe. Thank you so much. From the depth of my soul to the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you, and I hope that we have given you an equal or greater value in the time that you have spent with us, because that's why it's called spending your time. So when you spend your time, you are supposed to be looking for an equal or greater value of your time, and we hope that we've been able to help you out on all of that. So on that note, I'm not going to play with the outro song because right now YouTube is really tripping with the what is it called, the free copywritten or what a copywritten free music. And so right now we're going back and forth with them about it. The stuff that they provided for us, now they're telling us that we can't use. So hopefully we'll get this thing straightened out. But they're coming at us in every kind of way to try to prevent the show from continuing on. But they can't put down anything that God has ordained. I love you all if you love truth, but know that the love that God has for you will always supersede anything that I have. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. Treat others as you would have them treat you. Do it because it's the right thing to do, not because there's some material gain or because you're looking for some kind of applause or adulation that comes with that. Do it because it's the right thing to do and because God is watching, okay? Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. I'll see you back in about 30, okay? Peace.